the Office of the Military Ombud says that it has finalised 39 of the 56 cases that it received from members of the public against soldiers on duty during the 2020-2021 financial year. Now, the cases relate to the conduct of the South African National Defence Force who were deployed to enforce COVID-19 regulations during the hard lockdown last year. And some of the reported cases that were captured on camera include SANDF members visiting a tavern, taking and drinking alcohol, throwing empty cans at the tavern owner and assaulting him. And they also allegedly stole cash from a cash register and loaded alcohol worth thousands of rands into police vans. Now, these details were revealed by the South African Military Ombud's office when he briefed the Portfolio Committee on Defence and Military Veterans. South Africa's Military Ombud, retired Lieutenant General Vusumuzi Masondo, joins us now to talk about this. Mr. Masondo, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina, and morning to the viewers of your program.
I was just saying to you off air, it seems it was about a year ago that we had you on the show and, we were talking about some of these investigations at the time. So as we speak right now, 39 of the 56 cases have been finalized. So what were some of the challenges that you encountered in trying to finalize these cases?
Sakina, we must remember that most of the complaints that we received during the period of the lockdown. At the time, we're not working from the office, we're working from home, and we provided staff with tools to be able to work from home. And therefore, many of the complainants were contacting the office through social media platforms. And as a result, because of the lockdown and all that, we couldn't truly commence in earnest with the investigation of these complaints. We were only able to do that once the lockdown levels were lowered and movement was allowed. Because as part of our investigation, sometimes we have to do in-local inspection to make sure that the information that has been provided by the complainants is actually accurate, and also interviews on the spot.
So in the intro there, I basically spoke about an overview of the sort of complaints, but you are, as the Ombud, investigating 56 complaints, 39 of which have been concluded. But what is the nature, generally speaking, of the complaints before you?
Well, we must remember that a number of these complaints were occasioned by the fact that the SANDF was deployed in big numbers in support of the SAPS in order to enforce lockdown regulations. Now, the complaints center around the issues of excessive use of power, assault, and generally heavy-handedness of the soldiers in terms of dealing with members of the public.
And speaking of General Masondo, one of the cases that drew a lot of attention, and so because a life was actually lost, was that of Collins Khoza. That case, of course, went to court last year. Any further details, specifics on this one from your office?
Well, I'm sure if you followed the events, you would recall that at the time, although the issue of Khoza was in the public domain, we're not able to proceed with the investigation because, first and foremost, we didn't receive a complaint from the Khoza family itself. And the complaint about the incident of the Khoza murder, we actually received from a member of Parliament, Mr. Mare. But unfortunately, Mr. Mare couldn't then provide us with sufficient detail in terms of us being able to proceed with the investigation. We then had to use Section 611 of our Act, which empowers the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans to instruct the Military Ombud to actually investigate an incident that is then the public domain. And given that instruction by the minister, then we're able to then investigate, and we then submitted our final report to the minister with a recommendation of action that must be taken against the disciplinary action that must be taken against those members who were involved in the incident.
So just in that regard, and I know you've done your work as the Ombuds Office, but how far do your duties stretch then beyond that point? Do you actually monitor whether recommendations have been implemented?
Of course, you are right to say our work as an office ends with us providing a report to the minister and for her to then act. But we find it also necessary just to monitor if the recommended actions have actually been implemented. So, yes, we do monitor implementation to some extent.
So, in that regard, of the reports that have been finalized and recommendations that have been made and sent to the minister, do you know, have you been able to get an assessment of the compliance with the recommendations as per your reports?
But unfortunately, especially with these cases of members of the public, we have not really been able to confirm whether implementation has actually taken place.
So as the Ombuds Office, once there is no implementation, do you still have any standing, any sort of jurisdiction or mandate should your recommendations not be complied with?
Sakina, you know, our recommendations are actually not binding on the minister. But we are encouraged by the fact that the minister, although it's not prescribed in the Act that our recommendations are binding, she actually deals with these as if they are actually binding on her. Because in instances where she's not happy with the recommendation made by the office, she usually instructs the department to take the office on review. That is to the High Court, as prescribed in our Act.
And I guess, we'll have to follow up in a different way directly on these. But you also indicated, Lieutenant General Masondo, that your office, this is the highest number of cases that was brought by the public against soldiers in a single year since the establishment of the Military Ombuds Office in 2012. What caused this conspicuous deviation? Is it as a result of the lockdown solely, or are there other contributing factors here?
Well, Sakina, I think you know that since the advent of democracy or independence in our country in 1994, it was the first time that such huge numbers of soldiers were actually deployed internally in support of the members of the SAPS. And of course, we believe that this number of complaints were occasioned by that fact.
And Judge Hans Fabricius also ordered that the South African National Defence Force and the South African Police Services need to develop and publish a code of conduct for a state of disaster, and that they needed to circulate clear guidelines to the public on the circumstances under which force can be used, and also how to go about lodging these complaints. And you touched on some of the challenges for your office in terms of the public lodging complaints earlier on. Do you know if that order was carried out, though, by the Department of Defense?
I don't know for certain that it was, because I remember there were measures being taken by the department to try and carry out that order. But I wouldn't be able to confirm. Perhaps you could check that information with the department.
We certainly saw, Charles, and hence I just asked whether you are aware of this, by no means expecting you to actually take accountability for that. But then there were also reports that soldiers were assaulting people, even shooting at barking dogs. But you have dismissed some of these cases, your office has, because of a lack of evidence. So what recommendations are you looking at in order to curtail the violence, the perceived violence by law enforcers and soldiers, members of the South African National Defence Force in particular in this instance, and also to ensure that there is ultimately accountability when people do transgress?
Yeah, Sakina, we have on a monthly basis meetings with the chief of the National Defence Force, where we use that opportunity, apart from following up on the cases that are under investigation, but to discuss general issues of concern to the office, like the issue of excessive force that was initially used by the soldiers during the start of the deployment. And I must say, I think those interactions, they are bearing fruit in a way, because during the latter stages of the deployment of the soldiers, I think we have seen that the behavior of the soldiers had somehow changed. We need to keep in mind that the soldiers are actually essentially trained to fight wars, and when they have to be deployed internally, they have to also undergo some kind of reorientation training, so that they are sensitized in terms of how they deal with members of the public.
All the more reason for the education and the accountability to also stand. But one of the things that also didn't sit well with the public was, of course, what some of the leaders said in terms of the language that was used by the ministers, for example, saying that soldiers were provoked. And I'm curious to find out, in terms of your investigations and your findings, did you find that this was some of the reasons provided by those who were accused and against whom charges were laid by the public, that they felt that they were provoked by the public?
Well, Sakina, I don't recall any instances where the soldiers in their defense, said they were provoked by members of the public. In most instances, they would try to deny actually that they were involved in any acts of aggression or violation of the rights of members of the public. So far, I wouldn't then be able to say yes, they were. Perhaps if I check the detail with my investigators, but so far in the reports that I've received as the Military Ombud, that fact has not come out.
And then just to wrap up, 17 of the 56, it said that 29, or rather 39, have been concluded of the cases that you are investigating. So the remaining 17, what is the reason for the delay with those?
Well, with the remaining 17, 9, actually the investigations have been completed, and the preliminary reports have been sent to interested parties. With the remaining 8, well, the investigations are still ongoing, because sometimes there are challenges in terms of contacting witnesses and issues like that. to corroborate some of the evidence that has been provided by the complainants.
And I know this is what we invited you for, but I just need to ask, in terms of other investigations that you're dealing with as the Military Ombud, there were, for example, questions around procurement of vaccines by the South African National Defence Force, also contracts that were given to Cuba. Are you investigating any of those cases? Is there any complaint before you at the moment?
Well, we were requested by Honorable Marais to actually investigate procurement, but it is not within the competency of the office to do that. And as a result, what we did was to refer that complaint to the public protector, who've got the necessary resources and competency to actually deal with that complaint.
Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. Appreciate it. South Africa's Military Ombud, retired Lieutenant General Vusumuzi Masondo, giving us an update on the preliminary outcomes of the investigations of South African National Defence Force members that were deployed to enforce COVID-19 regulations during the hard lockdown. So that's where it's at the moment. And as he said, referred that which his office does not have the competency to investigate, like procurement issues, to the Public Protector's Office. Now,